We come to the next subject, which is strategies to develop paid content success. And I'm very happy now to have the sponsor of this session here. We are connecting with Moritz Hilger, who's the CEO at CeleraOne, and together with Gilbert, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Washington Post. So happy to have you two here. Please choose a chair. Whatever, Jeremy, in the middle. Do you want some water? Yeah, maybe we could get some water. Let's go straight to figures. Let me combine the figure of 75% gain in subscribers in 2016, which is more than doubling circulation revenue. Incredible number. Connecting with the question, what happened?
Well, as you probably know, the American election was very contested. It was full of surprises, and more than anything else, I think there was this issue of what news is credible. And at the Washington Post, in many ways, we were incredibly lucky. We had invested very heavily in our newsroom. A lot of people who are very digitally minded after Jeff Bezos bought the Post in October of 2013. And so we were really uniquely well suited. We had a brand people could trust, but in a voice that felt of the internet when the election happened. And so while the election is not solely responsible for the rise in subscriptions, I think it was a major factor.
Besides that, we have, and we already dropped that subject today, fake news. Is fake news a driver for paid content?
I think fake news has made people remember what was important about credible news in the first place. That when we think about what we as the Washington Post have to offer, it's an incredibly talented newsroom of about 750 journalists, which is great. But also we have a long history of all the journalists who came before us. And so that to some degree our brand rests on the work of investigative reporters like Dana Priest and Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. And so I think it's less that we are an antidote to fake news and more that we are a brand that people could rely on even before they were aware that fake news was an issue.
Yeah, this word of trust that is going down that very day, all the day through. Reach is important, subscriptions are important. How do you prioritize reach to subscriptions?
I think one really leads to the other. One of the things that we have discovered early on is that, frankly, you can't drive subscriptions without having a lot of reach.
Sure.
That has been really critical for us to introduce or reintroduce people to the Washington Post. And it's only once they have not just an affinity for the brand, but a true reliance on the kinds of news gathering we do, that we can ask them to pay. And so over the last 2.5 years, we started with a fairly flexible paywall registration model where after a certain number of articles, we were asking you, can you give us an email address? And then it was after a certain number of articles, a smaller number, you might be asked about paying. And now you can read about 5 articles and then you're asked to pay. And so over time, we have developed with the audience a relationship where we hope that by the time we actually ask firmly, will you pay for our journalism directly, you already know its value.
And last question to you for the moment. Talking target groups, whom are the people that are most subscribing now and coming to the Washington Post to stay there and pay regularly?
It's interesting because the Washington part of the Washington Post always drove the core subscribers. That the people most likely to pay digitally had been the people most likely also to subscribe in print. We only offer the printed paper in the Washington, D.C. area, but now the Washington, D.C. area represents 5 to 7% of our overall digital audience, just in the States. So it's a relatively small portion. So we have moved away from your job depends on what happens in the federal government, therefore you should pay, to the quality of journalism we do affects everyone, and therefore you should pay. One of the things that has been interesting is to watch the baby boomers certainly had a relationship, often with a print newspaper. And so for some of them, paying for online only was okay. In some cases, they could see paying for both. Generation X that followed was a much harder generation. They essentially came of age believing that information on the internet should be free. Our millennial audience is a big driver of digital subscriptions. That the same generation that believes they should pay for Netflix or HBO or some of the other content verticals are now comparing our offering to those. It's not that we're winning out over Game of Thrones, we're not. But if we can come in at a price point that is comparable to what you pay for HBO, then maybe that's okay. And so actually we have really benefited by the average age of our consumers coming way down because they are more willing to pay for digitally only services.
But if I take that serious, that means like the biggest competitor is maybe not the other newspaper, rather Netflix or whatever you say. So this is the game you're in?
We don't see a lot of people who tell us that they are prioritizing purchasing our subscription against purchasing someone else's. There are plenty of people who subscribe to the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, or the New York Times and the Washington Post, or the Economist and the Washington Post. It is much more of a value proposition. Can we charge a rate that seems fair to them, but also allows us to produce the kind of journalism we want? That's really the question.
We come back to that later. Moritz, for the moment, you studied a very interesting, you published a very interesting study about paid content in Europe. First, what was the motivation behind? And second, what was the most interesting outcome of it?
Well, the motivation was that when we talk about paid content, everybody looks or points at the big U.S. papers, whatever, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and says, well, okay, it works for them. They have an international audience. They are very big brands, but we wanted to show that it's actually that it's working in Europe as well. That there's quite a lot of brands that do follow a very, very successful paid content strategy. And yeah, we wanted to cover that.
I would like to know from you, which kind of publishers stand out or stood out?
Actually, we found success stories in almost all markets. We have, I don't know, in Poland there's Gazeta Wyborcza, which has like 110,000 digital subscribers, which is great. In France, Le Temps, very nice, Le Monde, sorry. And Scandinavia, very, very strong. In Norway, you have VG or Aftenposten, which have more than 100,000 subscribers, which is awesome, given the small audience that you have in Norway. Germany, of course, the Süddeutsche already has like more than 50,000 digital subscribers. Bild has 340,000 digital subscribers, a very, very good success story. And of course, UK with the Times now having 180,000 subscribers. I mean, who would have thought about that a few years ago?
But we see how much the political situation is connected to the question of digital subscription in many contexts. For example, if I see 50,000 at I think Süddeutsche Zeitung related to 385,000 in general. Print copies of readers. Is that a lot of air, do you think, still to cover with digital subscription to go up?
Yeah,
really?
I think so. Yes. As you said, I mean, there's a lot of air until you reach the print subscription numbers, and I mean that's so print subscribers. That there are as that many people that read the print newspaper, there should be actually at least the same number that should be able to subscribe online.
Coming back to you, please talk a bit or give us an insight about your strategies, how to really attract practically people to make them subscribers.
One of the most interesting things we've actually done is in our newsroom, because for a very long time we have not financially incented, but had talked a lot about our overall traffic numbers and celebrated stories that had large reach, which is important. But those large reach stories aren't always the ones that resonate most with our subscribers. So one of the things we've really done is rather than tell the story to our subscribers about the journalism that works for them, we have really tried to tell the story of what works for our subscribers to our journalists in the newsroom, to the reporters and editors. And that's been really important. So instead of just saying there were X number of unique visitors to a story, we've started to say, what percentage of your visitors were subscribers? At least which ones do we know? And we have started to look at, we've actually built an internal tool that ranks stories based on the engagement level for that story, about time spent and how likely people were to go to a second story, about what percentage of the audience were subscribers. And that has made a difference. That a lot of the journalism that were motivating our subscribers was going unheralded because often the more viral stories, which are often, again, the part of our audience that's the least likely to subscribe, were being celebrated. And now we've sort of changed that equation so that we're producing more journalism and really celebrating more journalism in our newsroom that is geared towards people who might subscribe. So that's one thing. I think the second thing is more and more we have tried to help people who are subscribing see the value, because in the same way that we want our journalistically created stories to drive people to share them, We want our subscribers to be proud of their subscriptions. And so we're working on different ways that we can kind of incent people to let other people know that they are subscribers.
How do you incent that?
Well, we've done a couple of different things. We're starting to look at some kinds of events that we can invite people to that are more active members of our community. We're starting to look at ways that our individual journalists can reach out to people who are more active subscribers or sharers of our content. And we've talked about all kinds of different pricing models that could take advantage of that as well.
Do people also co-generate stories? So let's say like user-generated content. We had it in the video section. Do a lot of stories now come through the door of your subscribers or something like? Do they add to the journalistic value?
Definitely. I mean, I would say the community is a critical part of what we do. We have not said, oh, subscribers we're going to treat differently than other people in our audience. But that the publishing cycle at the Post very much used to be, you report your story, you write your story, you turn it over to some editors, they publish the story, they promote the story, and then you will go off and write another story. That model is absolutely broken. Instead, what we do now is you report the story, you produce the story, you choose the image that we'll use to share, you write the headline, you determine, and you may modify these things, but what the social headline or link might be. And then, once it's published, after it's been vetted by editors, et cetera, then you engage in a conversation with your audience. And it is that conversation with your audience that drives the next story.
Do you want to add something to that? Because what my next question would be, like algorithms, AI, etc. How is that further going to change the job he does and you do? So maybe you can add a bit, the insight into digital strategy.
Well, I think that looking at data and like looking in an intelligent way at data, which is well, the AI approach, will definitely support in. I think also some stuff you covered, like when to show, what to show, in terms of paywall or price or whatever, and also in how to engage the audience more. If you actually look at the content and intelligence, you might actually get better suggestions for your social headlines and have a support for the editors. So I think this will be a very big thing in well, this year. Like at least we put it on our roadmap for this year to make paywalls more intelligent or more dynamic.
What about chatbots? And then you, Jeremy. What about chatbots? That the bots in the first session, this idea, or second session, the ideas of bots, like really connecting with people and using them more and more.
I think messaging is a very important way of communicating to the audience, and so probably chatbots will also be like one channel. But I'm kind of convinced that like a news feed or a news page kind of style will still be a very important role. I mean, the chatbot might get you there, but that's where you have like a curated content and all that stuff. So.
I mean, I think especially artificial intelligence is and has an important role to play, but I think we have to be very careful so that our subscribers, I would contend, are often the people who have the least amount of time and need to be the most efficient with their news reading, news sharing. And so what we have to do when we use AI is make sure that we're not offering a commodity, that we are not offering news in a way or a style or a piece of information that you can get somewhere else, and that we are incredibly respectful of our audience's time and attention. So the power of AI to me is to say, we know enough about your news consumption habits that instead of telling you the background on a topic that you know all too well, you know, what drove the Brexit or what drove the recent vote in the Netherlands, let's just tell you the thing you don't know, whether it's news or analysis. And so we need to use these AI tools to help really personalize our stories, to kind of break the chain of the reporter as writer, where we offer one and one version only. Instead, we need to be able to offer versions of the story, and I think this is where AI is really powerful, that fit you and your needs and your background knowledge. And I think we need to be prepared to modify in real time. And we're doing some of that now, but maybe not enough of that, which is to say, if our readers are not scrolling to the end of stories, they're not spending as much time as we'd expect, if they're not engaging or sharing in the way that we want, that we modify the stories as we go. And again, we're starting to do more of that, but what I think we all have to acknowledge is that within our newsrooms, with our limited capacity, that may mean that we write fewer stories and make more of each story we write, instead of saying, oh, just creating more is better.
Mm-hmm. Is every journalist to the same extended amount of time integrated in this constant process of rethinking what he or she did, etc.? How do you organize that? And that's my last question for the moment. I go for your question. I have a few more, but I go for yours. Yes, please, Jeremy.
I would say no. Not everyone is engaging in the same way in terms of optimizing their content in real time. That's for a couple of reasons. One reason is some people are more proficient than others. A second one is sometimes there is more value in reporting that next story than optimizing it. So one of the things we need to be better at is handing off a story when it makes sense. If a reporter is the only one with the right collection of sources to advance the story and someone else can optimize that story, then we should do that. In some cases, it makes a lot of sense. We have attempted through algorithmic prediction to assess what the audience could be for a story. And so if you're dramatically underperforming what we think the audience should be, that's very different than if you're slightly underperforming what we think the audience should be.
Mm-hmm. If there's nobody in the moment, I would like to ask you, Moritz, what do you wish and expect from publishers? There are some in the room, maybe. So, talking mindset, talking risk-taking, whatever.
Talking
openness.
Talking mindset, especially with regard to paid content. I think focus on the topic and a commitment to the topic is very important, because what we also learned from our report is that it took those that we covered, those successful stories, it took them a few years to actually have a success story. I think that's also what we heard from Jeremy just now. So you have to be persistent and you have to be focused and dedicated. So you need this dedicated team of journalists and technology working together, and of course product.
Taking that, what he says, where, Jeremy, would you say, being self-critical ourselves, we would have to be quicker, and where would we have to have a longer breath?
I think it's really critical that paywalls or paid content, registration, subscribers, whatever you call it, are part of our future going forward. So I think we have to be patient, because initially, the paywall is going to have, or the paid content strategy is going to have consequences. It's very difficult to simultaneously grow incredibly quickly and try to ask people to pay directly. So that requires a lot of patience. I also think we need to be much smarter about defining our own value. That we have often conflated the act of transporting the newspaper we print for you and the newspaper we bring to you with the value we ask for in terms of paying. And that we need to divorce people from that we need to show that the act of creating the stories is more important, because at least in the US, print will be in decline for the near future. Maybe it will stabilize, but it will be declining, where the digital audience is growing much more rapidly. And as long as people think the only thing they're paying for is for you to deliver a printed product, it's going to be hard to ask them to pay for digital news.
I have a last question from my part. There is a small question over there. Yeah. I take one, and then we go to the final round.
Thanks very much. Rasmus Nielsen from the Reuters Institute at the University of Oxford. Moritz, I just wanted to hear from you what you think of Jeremy's proposition that you can't do subscriptions without scale, since the Washington Post went from a local market of about 6 million people to a national market of 320 million people. What do you think that means for publishers in Europe, where some national markets are smaller than the metro market that the Washington Post seems to be leaving behind?
I think you don't necessarily need the scale to drive subscriptions up. That's actually what we see with some of the publishers we work with. They are able to not actually scale. They do not focus. Not at all. Of course, you focus on reach, but you not. It's not the main driver. The main driver is actually the subscription, and I'm actually pretty confident that this will work, and it actually works for some already. So.
And I would add one thing. We at the Washington Post needed that relative to the position we were in. We were I would describe it as sort of a super regional 3 or 4 years ago, where we were DC based and pretty DC focused at that time, and yet we had a fairly large international and national reporting commitment. And when we looked at the number of journalists we wanted to have in our newsroom, we probably couldn't have done it on the back of subscriptions alone in the DC area. And frankly, that's the only area where we distribute in print. And so for those people who subscribe to both, for us, it didn't make sense. I don't know that it wouldn't work for someone else, but it wouldn't have worked for us.
What is the share of techies and journalists in the newsroom?
We have about, not all hosted in DC, but we have about 750, 760 journalists and about 60 engineers, developers who are in our newsroom. There are about 130 engineers who work most closely with the newsroom.
Okay. Very quick question at the end. What do you think of Blendle?
Well, Blendle is...
Or-
I like... Huh?
Or, Blendle, and so on.
Well, in Europe it's Blendle. In the States it's maybe Flipboard. Like that's somewhat comparable. I think they told a very good story of news in the digital age. It's about how to actually address the user. They have a very a very appealing story. Well, unfortunately for them, it's still not really kicking off. But yeah, we will see what if that is something for the future, or if we stay with brands.
Talking about challenges, last question to you both. The biggest challenge in the near future, one word. A one-word answer, please. Biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges. Any word on your tongue?
Well, on my tongue and on that topic, it would be the subscriptions. Digital
Okay, and for you?
It's trust.
Trust. Okay, we go for that. Thank you for your trust and for your time, both. Thank you very, very much.